Following both failed colonization attempts by Achao and Horjon, the culture of these two nations began to drastically shift into a direction that any would deem as tyrannical at best. Their xenophobic isolationism reached radical extents, with anything outside of the borders of Achao and Horjon being forbidden under any circumstances, and any religious dissent was crushed, such as any grievances against the ruling Elder Council and the cult of Onimu'u, especially in Horjon, due to the subtle growth of Horjon occultism. These strictures were enforced by the military of Achao, who, despite having lost the recent War of Reconciliation, were still turned into a radical policing force that grew over time to prevent any foreign invasions from rare ambitious neighboring tribes and to stop anybody from leaving. Religious propaganda and indoctrination became prevalent. Any degree of heresy or attempts at leaving Achao and Horjon were met with death. The wealth gap increased significantly. Plenty of unjust laws were created. The average citizen was treated like a borderline slave, and the famines and disease from overpopulation that plagued the area in previous years only grew worse in these conditions. Born within this time period was a man named Iga'auki. Iga'auki was born from noble blood in the city of Achao, and even from a young age he was devout in his faith to the cult of Onimu'u. Iga'auki studied constantly, zealously adhered to all tenets of his faith, and hated any degree of dissident behaviors or opinions against the cult of Onimu'u or the ruling Elder Council. Iga'auki's zealotry wasn't left unnoticed, and he was adopted into the priesthood of Achao, where he learned all the intricacies of the priesthood and the cult of Onimu'u. At first, Iga'auki took this opportunity in stride, but after a few years, he began to become discontent with the lonely and slow lifestyle of the priesthood. He looked on to neighboring Horjon and up into the Oidigao Mountains, and was disgusted with the growing revolutionary cells, occult practitioners, and secret societies growing and slowly militarizing into minor armed conflicts and assassinations. Iga'auki wanted action and justice against the quarrelsome Horjon people, and so he was allowed to begin training as one of the battle priests of Achao. Iga'auki thrived in this more active position, and after many years of training and work, Iga'auki moved up the ranks. He began to develop a reputation as a cruel and merciless man who was willing to do anything and everything to dissidents. Iga'auki burned small villages, uncovered and destroyed revolutionary cells, engaged in military campaigns against the Lake and the Oidigao Mountains and against Horjon, thwarted multiple escape attempts and assassinations, and more. Iga'auki's cruelty gained him the moniker of Iga'auki the Warden, a title he took in stride and carried with him through the years as he worked his way up to becoming the general of the Achao army. For the majority of his life, Iga'auki the Warden oppressed, subjugated, and enforced in the name of Achao and the Elder Council, but as he grew older, he began to have his doubts. Moved by Horjon teachings that he picked up along the way, personal interpretations of the Igorous Holy Book, including forbidden scriptures recovered from Horjon, and an overwhelming doubt and guilt over the suffering he caused, Iga'auki the Warden began to turn against everything he once championed. Iga'auki the Warden began to believe that the realm of Achotha was a great test, and that the goal of life was to escape, not enforce, entrapment upon Achotha. Achao, as a microcosm of this ideal, was to be the first test, and thus was meant to be escaped too. Iga'auki the Warden began to preach this idea to anybody who would listen, even to the Elder Council, and soon his entire life's work became undone. Iga'auki became a pariah, a heretic, and a criminal, losing his position and nearly losing his life. Iga'auki the Warden fled to Horjon, and due to his knowledge of Horjon's secret societies due to years of uncovering them, he was able to find and join one willing to accept his newfound conversion. It took a lot of convincing and many years to prove his worth in conversion, but Iga'auki found an uneasy home in Horjon, where he preached his new ideals to open ears and studied the heresies of Horjon, growing his knowledge and his following in the underground of Horjon. After years of being in hiding in Horjon, Iga'auki launched a revolution in Achao and Horjon in the 371st year of the Dawn Era. The goal of this conflict was, at most, to liberate the entirety of Achao and Horjon, or at least to create the circumstances needed to allow for a mass exodus of people out of these countries if they so chose. This revolution developed into what would become known as the War of Liberation, also known as the Achotha Peasants' War or the Great Emancipation, and it went very poorly for the rebels. Hegeauke's revolution was poorly planned, overly decentralized, and despite spending multiple years garnering support in Horjon, his lifetime of subjugation stopped many potential rebels from following his cause. The plan for the conflict was to spark a single, massive, violent event in all the major cities to crash down the priesthood and the government in one fell swoop with the help of armed sleeper cells and revolutionaries to allow for enough chaos for people to flee Account Horjon under the cover of chaos, and to potentially pick up the pieces with poorly trained and poorly equipped Horjon militias. During this conflict, Hegeauke gained a new moniker, becoming known instead as Hegeauke the Liberator. The most to come out of this conflict was a mass exodus of Horjon people out of the country who fled southeast into the lands owned by the Copper Kingdoms and potentially into the now lost city of Ayakidgu. After only 4 years of conflict, the revolution of Hegeauke was routed and the city of Horjon was completely destroyed for a second time, despite most people in Horjon not even supporting the war. Hegeauke the Liberator's revolution was thwarted, and defeat became certain. To end the war, Hegeauke the Liberator bargained for exile over execution, appealing to tradition and religion during his bargaining. Hegeauke initially hoped to flee south to find what became of King Achotha II, but when the Elder Council agreed for exile, despite this request playing right into Hegeauke's ideal, the Elder Council included the stipulation that he must flee specifically into the northwest into the Uyezhuina, which was deemed as being akin to certain death due to the belief that the Uyezhuina was literally the world's edge. Hegeauke the Liberator reluctantly agreed, gathered what was left of his followers, and fled into the Uyezhuina, beginning a long journey that would become known as the North March. After the war ended and Hegeauke the Liberator was exiled, the military of Akal spent several years cracking down upon dissidents, and Hegeauke's original role as an oppressor began to look lenient compared to the wrath imposed upon Horjon. This crushing oppression only lasted for a couple of years before the two countries largely returned to normal, but it left its mark upon Horjon forever in the form of added resentment, growing underground secret societies, and new oppressive laws that lasted until the very end of Akal civilization.